Alice Waters. 30 years ago, if you would have asked me if I'd be sitting in front of 700 people interviewing Alice Waters, I would have said absolutely no way. So this is a huge honor for us. So before we get started, Alice, did you want to maybe start off reading a little bit out of your book? And we'll get this going. Yeah. We had a great dinner last night with Alice, and the conversation flowed pretty well, so I'm kind of expecting we're going to do this. We were supposed to get together and do shots at 1 o'clock, but that never happened.
Well, I thought I might read you just the beginning of the book because I think it tells a lot about what I was thinking when I began. Here's how I cook. First, I'm at the farmer's market buying a bunch of French breakfast radishes, the purple fringed lettuces, the spring garlic. And I'm thinking about the state of the Blenheim apricots and the Santa Rosa plums. I'm looking for fruits and vegetables that are perfectly ripe, things that just came out of the ground or were just picked. I'm not necessarily thinking about how the ingredients will go together. I'm just responding to what I'm finding. It's a lot about aliveness. It's a lot about color, the smell of things, the look. I'm listening to what the farmer has to say, and he's telling me what's going on in the fields. I think we forget sometimes that food is alive, and that we have to follow that intuition and treat food as a living thing. At this point, I don't quite know what I'm going to cook, and I'm not really putting the meal together. It's when I take the ingredients home, and I unpack them from my basket, and I spread them out on the table in the kitchen. And that's when I start imagining how the ingredients relate to one another and how they come together to make a menu. I'm using all my senses. I'm smelling the garlic. I'm tasting the pungency of the radishes and the tartness of the vinaigrette, feeling the firmness of the apricots. I'm thinking about the people who are going to sit at the table and what they like to eat, the courses following each other. What kind of day is it? Whether it's cold outside and I want to light a fire in the fireplace, or whether it's warm and I just want to sit outside by the herb garden. I'm improvising, trying to capture and express that moment in time. I'm letting my senses lead me. It's how we cook at Chez Panisse. It's how we've always cooked at Chez Panisse. There you go. Yeah.
So do you see yourself? Do you think of yourself as a chef or other? And
other?
Yeah. and how do you define chef in your mind?
Well, I said Jacques Pepin came to the restaurant one time, and he called me chef, and I said, you know, Jacques, I'm not a chef like you. I'm not a chef. I think I'm a really good cook, and I think I'm a good taster. And he said to me, if you run a kitchen like this, you are a chef. And so take that and own that. And I still, though, feel like that term defines a kind of person in this country, or for that matter, in other countries, that has a lot of, I guess, I think, fancy know-how.
Yeah.
And I never went to cooking school. I never learned that way. I just learned by doing it.
So cooking seems to me like more of forgive the pun, more organic for you. It kind of starts, like you said, at the market and just presents itself on the plate.
Well, I always have read cookbooks, and I was very, very lucky that someone, when I came back from France from that trip when I was 19, gave me a copy of Elizabeth David. And she's a wonderful British writer, and many of you might know who she is. But she had gone to France, and like me, she just fell in love with the markets. And she would talk about, getting something beautiful from this farmer. And she didn't have very long recipes. She would just say, wash the lettuce and pour the vinaigrette on top. And so I'd have to look up in Louvre's Gastronomique, now what is a vinaigrette, and what is putting it on top, and what salad did she use, and it was very much like that for me.
So you grew up in New Jersey, and one of your favorite birthday memories is going to the automat, which when I read that I thought...
That's true.
Well, when I read that I thought, well, that's how ironic that you would eventually end up becoming one of the mouthpieces for organically grown, fresh foods picked that day, treated properly. And then what? Then you went to France, and that thoroughly changed your whole outlook on cooking and basically life in general, no?
It did. It did completely. But in defense of Horn and Hardart, back in the 50s, I suspect that the food was more or less real in my mind. I mean, probably the tomatoes actually came from nearby, and conceivably my lemon meringue pie was made with real lemons. But that really wasn't the charm of it. I loved having somebody put a little slice of pie up in the box, and you could see somebody behind there making things and putting them there. And I loved having a choice. When your mother isn't a very good cook and you have to eat everything on your plate and you don't have any choice. This seemed like a dream to go to the automat, and my parents got off cheap. I think it cost a nickel or a dime.
You had a pretty good relationship with your parents, didn't you? I mean, even a good relationship with your parents, right? Even after you went to Berkeley, was.
It's true. It's true. But you have to remember that, or you'll find out in reading the book, that my mother was a communist.
Yeah.
And she always wanted to go to Berkeley. And ultimately, my father got a job at the university, and she did come to Berkeley. Kind of her dream came true.
You never got swept up in the celebrity chef craze that we see going on. You seem to have kind of managed to live a pretty simple life. I don't want to say under the radar, but outside of your the things that you try to get accomplished, we don't really hear a lot about like your personal life. What's your opinion of the way this whole celebrity chef craze has done for cooking in the United States? Has it been good? Has it been bad?
Well, actually, I think it's been very, very important. Just to think that food is a subject that people are talking about. They opened that door in a way that, and some chefs, and there are many now, who talk about real, farm to table, and they are really amazing. And people like Dan Barber, I mean, he's just doing that at his restaurant, taking people out in the field and showing them what he's growing.
It seems like the kind of the farm to table movement has what kind of come to, I think, a point now to where we need to figure out what's next, right? I mean, we've gone from the dark ages of the 40s and 50s where everything came in cans and frozen and stuff, and then you came around in the 70s and started that, and then the rest of us kind of caught up in the early 2000s. What's next, do you think? What's the direction we like, chefs and people who are trying to live this way, what's next in this whole movement that you started?
Well, it's definitely not a trend, what
been
we're
around too long
talking
for that,
about.
yeah.
We're talking about really the way people have eaten together and taken care of the land, really since the beginning of civilization. It's always been, people have always spent money on food because it was precious, never wasted it. And all of this has only changed, really, in the last 50, 60 years. And so we can come back to our senses again, I believe.
Right, I've always thought the table has kind of taken in this new, it's replaced what we would think of as the old fire hearth, and we'd all gather around and share what was gathered and cooked. And I've always believed that cooks were like the first civilizers of humanity, and that they brought us the food and we cooked it and then distributed it. And I think it's fantastic to see how that's starting to get more and more popular, with the kind of things being served, more family style and people getting back to farms. But would you agree that this connection that we seem to have lost but then found again is going to help re-civilize? Was it Guy Savoy said that restaurants the last civilized bastion in the world?
Well, I think we have a formidable, what would I like to say, fast food culture.
Yeah, job ahead of us here on this.
That has been educating children from basically from birth into a set of values that are really changing our world. I've always, and I'm in the process of, I can't believe I'm saying that I'm going to write another book, but I really want to put this idea forward that we are what we eat. So when we eat fast food, which is really the diet of most Americans in this country, we're not only eating the food that isn't nourishing, but we're eating the values that come with the food.
It comes down to education, right? What we're trying to
Right.
get people. How do we do that? How do we battle against these giant Monsantos and DuPonts, and they've got the money and they've got the lobby. They now have, unfortunately, the House. What can we do?
Well, I think we all have to go back to school. We have to go back to that last truly democratic institution, the public school system. And we have to really... And we have to feed our children real food and teach them the values that come with that. And that means, maybe that really means bringing them to the table at school and serving them a real meal.
It's a matter of just changing perception, getting attitudes changed. When Michelle Obama tried to do it, you thought she was asking these kids to eat fire.
Well, I think it can't come in that way of really compromising with these big, food, corporations. They're not to be negotiated with. They're not thinking about the same values. So I really believe that this could happen on the local level, like it's happening here in northern Michigan, where you're really chefs and farmers are getting together and with principals of schools and finding a way to feed children in a beautiful, tasty, engaged way.
Is this where your edible garden kind of, the schoolyard comes into play? It's almost like you go ahead.
Yes. Could you talk a little bit about where the edible garden started and then how now across the nation it's spreading into so many different communities, and that there's about 5,500 gardens that are available to kids and for education, and some of the progress that has been made?
Well, the whole idea, and maybe many of you know this story already, and bear with me, but I was called one day by a woman who was working in San Francisco County Jail. And she said, I'm gardening with the inmates, and we have grown this food. And if we grew it to your specification, would you buy it for shea pennies? And I said, well, if you grow it to our specifications, absolutely. I want watercress, all you can grow, and radishes. And she said, great. She said, but you have to come out to visit my students. And I said, no, I can't. I won't come out. Just send the food. I don't want to come to the jail. And she said, you must come. And so I was embarrassed, and I said, okay, I'll be there. And I went, and she gathered all of these young guys around, and she said to them, tell Alice about this garden project. And this one guy raised his hand, and he said, I shouldn't be saying anything. This is my first day in the garden, but it's the best day of my life. That's what he said. And I just said, oh, my goodness. Working in the garden can be transformational. And actually, it was so much so that when it was time to get out of jail, they didn't want to leave. And so she decided to open up a halfway house garden outside the jail. And they grew vegetables there, and they ended up selling them at the San Francisco Farmers Market. And ultimately, they never went back. They got jobs with the Tree Corps in San Francisco. But it was a combination of growing this food, the power of nature, and then the offering of the food to the homeless organizations that really made the change. And so I said to myself, if you can do it in a jail, you can do it in a school. And that's how it began. And I made a comment in a newspaper to a reporter who said, and I told him that it was shameful the way that the middle school in Berkeley looked, Martin Luther King Middle School. How could it be so run down? It looked abandoned. And how could it be this way in a university town, so close to the University of California? How could this be happening? And the principal called me up, And I went over to his office, and he said, well, what are you going to do? And I walked around this schoolyard, and it was a school that had been built on, believe it or not, 17 acres of land for 500 kids in 1921. But the cafeteria, because they had so many more kids now, they have 1,000 kids now that speak 22 different languages at home. And this is 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. But the cafeteria had just kind of fallen apart, and they had a snack bar at the end of the schoolyard. And right away, I just imagined, oh my God, we'll put a garden over there, and we'll build a cafeteria that's about twice as big as this room. And well, that will be where they'll all sit down and they'll all have lunch. And then there'll be a garden classroom. Not learning gardening, but doing math, all the academic subjects in the garden, and the same for a kitchen classroom. And I told Neil Smith, the principal, what I had in mind, and I said, free school lunch for every kid. Free organic school lunch. And he said, well, thanks so much, Alice. I'll get back to you. And to my surprise, 6 months later, he came back. And he said, let's just begin with the garden. And I said, it's either all or nothing, Neil. It's all or nothing. And he said, well, we'll just start with the garden. Don't say anything about the free school lunch right now. You're going to scare people. And so it's been our secret until about 3 years ago. I didn't start talking about it, but now I'm really talking about it.
So then I guess when I asked earlier about how do we fight against these big food corporations, kind of going back to your love of
Yes.
all things French, this is more like a French underground kind of motif here, right? You're just going to just guerrilla this in, not really talk about it. Just keep, up to 5,500. One day will be 1,000. One day,
That's
and then
right.
pretty soon, kind of like.
A little bit like that. I feel
Yeah.
like we're a little bit in the French underground, and we're passing notes to all the farm-to-table people and all the, get ready. We're going to do this in the schools.
Because that's kind of what I've seen is,
Yeah.
with the farm-to-table movement, you've still got these big food corporations that you're dealing with, and they're trying to get laws established to make it more difficult to buy food directly from the farmers. But what I'm seeing is restaurants like ourselves and like you and others who are just kind of not really listening to that.
That's right.
And just kind of keep preaching the gospel, and eventually you might not completely beat the big boys, but we might make a big enough impact to where they.
Now, that's why I call this a delicious revolution.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you taste it, as soon as you're engaged around the table with a group of friends, or you're cooking together, or you see the pleasure on the face of a little kid who's eating something in school that's so tasty and right, I just know that this can happen. And it's unfortunately, again, that fast food culture that's all the time co-opting our terms and telling us that cooking is drudgery and farming is hard work and more is better, time is money.
Yeah.
Advertising confers value, when none of that is true. I mean, the worth of a restaurant has always been, for me, word of mouth. None of the people I know advertise.
We don't advertise.
No, I've never, ever advertised.
Yeah.
In 46 years, we've never paid money for advertising. And it is word of mouth, and you want it to be word of mouth, because somebody, you're connecting that way, and you want their experience in your restaurant to inform somebody else. It's a lovely way to connect.
What I find really heartening is we come in contact with a lot of very passionate home cooks, people that are who love to go to the market to come and cook. We have a kind of an open door policy with, if somebody just wants to come in and cook for the evening. So we have home cooks kind of cycle in and out all the time from the restaurant. The school garden thing, it sounds like that's a great way to get kids kind of interested in cooking. I've just through my own career have noticed that the kitchen has been the salvation for a lot of people. They having a hard time in life, things aren't going well, but you introduce them to the kitchen and something sparks and they come alive.
Well, it's an experience that touches all of our senses, and those are our pathways into our mind, how we hear things, see things, smell it, taste it, look at that, and food touches those places. And I was just reading a little passage about Patience Gray, who was using the mortar and the pestle to really ground herself. And I feel that I do that too when I'm making a pesto. It's like a great kind of therapy to just smash the garlic.
It's meditative. It's Zen-like.
What?
It's meditative.
It is, but it's all the time. These aromas are coming up. It's a whole different experience than putting it in a blender. You're actually, just...
You're touching it. It's
right.
getting
and
on
you.
you.
Stick your finger in it. And,
Yeah.
It's really important, that part. I think the less equipment, the better.
We do. Yes, I agree. The whole modernist cuisine thing that we see going on right now, since you've mentioned the less equipment, the better, I couldn't agree with you more. I think some of the high-end food is becoming a little clinical, a little sterile, and it's too bad. You have another passage you want to read? Did you have something?
Shall I read that one about New York?
Yeah.
This was a very, yes.
This is a great story.
In the early 70s, I went to the south of France, and I fell in love with mesclun, a mix of young salad greens that you really couldn't find anywhere outside 45 minutes radius of Nice. I loved it so much that I brought the seeds back home and I planted them in my backyard so we could serve them at Chez Panisse. Mesclun became a staple on the menu, and we probably served salad grown in my backyard for a good 5 years. And then the farmers of Northern California realized the demand and began planting the seeds themselves. I think if there's one thing I'm responsible for in this country, something that I can take a little credit for, it's the propagation of real salad in the United States. I was so proud of that mesclun, the salad, that I took it to New York. In the late 1970s, after the restaurant had become established, Chez Panisse was one of Playboy magazine's 25 best restaurants in the country. We were number 7. The magazine invited each restaurant on the list to cook a dish at the big fete in New York City. Immediately I thought, I'm going to make a salad. That's my dish. Well, my close friend, Marion Cunningham, who had worked with the famous chef and food writer James Beard, said, James will loan you a bowl so you can make the dressing at his house. And Marion, ironically enough, was a great lover of iceberg lettuce herself. Sure enough, James Beard loaned me this beautiful wooden bowl, and I made our Chez Panisse version of the mesclun salad with chervil and herbs in these beautiful little just-picked lettuces we brought on the plane from California. All New York was invited, and every restaurant that had been on Playboy's list had a station. The other chefs, all men, were French and Italian, classically trained, representing restaurants from New York like Le Cercle. I respected everyone so much, and to be in that company was, well, I felt very honored. When I got there and looked around, I saw that all the chefs were making elaborate ice carvings, putting together their salmon quenelles. Somebody down the way was preparing a lobster extravaganza. There was a picture of us the day before it started, and I had on this antique maroon dress with the little accordion sleeves and a very pale blue stone sewn around the neckline. And I was surrounded by all these men in black suits. And to stand there as the only woman doing a green salad, I was completely embarrassed. I almost died. Amazingly, that salad is what people talked about the next day. I don't think I did anything with the presentation at all. I just served it on a plate. And we didn't even have baked goat cheese with it. Just bang, lettuce. But the response really woke me up. It made me realize my naivete, but I also felt a kind of pride in the simplicity of what we were doing at the restaurant. That I could think of going to New York and presenting a green salad as our dish from Chez Panisse. I remember talking all night to anyone who would come to my station about how James Beard had loaned me a salad bowl, as if that would give me some credibility. Like, well, at least he thinks this salad is all right.
But doesn't that speak to kind of the power of simplicity, right? When you rely on the quality of the ingredients, the quality of the olive oil, the freshness of the greens, simplicity, I think you would probably agree, is more difficult to accomplish than overly wrought, complicated dishes. That's probably.
Yeah.
Oh, you have something?
You're funny.
We would agree.
I think that the reoccurring theme in a lot of your cooking is about simplicity. And there was in the Chez 40-year anniversary book, there's a small list in there of suggestions that you had for people just generally to think about food, like to know your farmer and to eat in smaller amounts and to eat colors and these kinds of things. And could you share with everybody some of those ideas for some of the people who are newer to this way of thinking about food and simplicity and local sustainable?
Well, I think this kind of apple says it all. I've never seen this color of apple, and I just went to this grower not far from here, and I don't know how many varieties he had. How many?
250.
Oh, 250. 250 different kinds of apples. Well, it just piqued my curiosity. I just wanted to taste them. And I do think that less is more, that that in really making great food, you need to really be connected to the season and to the whole process of what it takes to grow food or to raise an animal. And I have come to believe that really 85–90% of cooking is knowing about the varietal that's planted, how it's taken care of, when it's picked, how quickly it gets to the restaurant, and then I can figure out how to use it. But if it's not picked at the right moment, or if the land isn't trying to give it all it can give it, you have to work at bringing out the flavor. And so that's a connection with the farm has changed really the life of the restaurant. I used to say that I'd give Bob Kennard the seeds and he would plant them. And now he picks his weeds and he says, cook them. It's just, it's such an amazing relationship. Carlo Petrini, the head of Slow Food, calls that we're co-producers, the people who are growing the food and the people who are eating the food.
Yeah, know your farmer.
Know your farmer.
Yeah. Would Chez Panisse be possible today with the way you did it? None of you had training. I don't think any of you had ever worked in a restaurant, which is horrifying to think.
I beg your pardon. One time we burnt the corn soup, and we had to serve it because we only had one menu. And I just said, it's roasted corn soup. It happens.
Yeah, it does happen. But could you take that? Well, actually, why don't you talk about the free speech movement in the '60s and how it influenced your life, but and probably in particular your way of cooking, your time with Montessori, your time in France.
My whole youth.
Yeah, so you got that about 15 minutes if you could do that.
No, well, you have to read it really in the book.
Buy 3 copies.
But, this is the 50th anniversary of the Summer of Love. I think we're in the autumn of love. We're in the autumn of love. But it's, I feel like, I was absolutely empowered by what was going on in the 60s and in the 70s, and I felt really empowered when we stopped the war in Vietnam. I said, oh my goodness, we can do this. We can do this. We can do it if we come together and we are focused. And so I've really never kind of left the counterculture. I've always worried about the connection between big corporations and the government. I from the beginning of the Gulf War, everybody always said it was about oil. In the 60s, we all said that. And in fact, it is. And I just felt like whatever I did, that people would come and support me. And I want all young people here to really feel like we are all there for you. We're all there. We'll come and taste it in your restaurant. It's got to be good, though, or we won't come back. But it's really, really important that people follow their passion, not believe that making money is the most important thing. In fact, we didn't make any money at the restaurant. We made enough, but I never got paid for a long time. But my friends took care of me, and it was, you felt that you were doing something that was really important, and you were working together at doing it.
And you believe that can still be done today?
Absolutely. I think that, I mean, I just hear about projects all the time. 2 friends of mine opened a farm in North Carolina, and they are growing food that is amazing looking, and all the different varietals of things, and they're doing CSA and putting all these great ingredients into boxes. It's fantastic what people are engaged with, but we don't hear about this. And we need some good news. And we need to really spread that good news.
Yeah. Your letter to Jeff Bezos from Amazon. You want to talk about that? And I mean, that's a brave move to do. I mean, he's the richest man in the world, one of the most powerful people on the planet, and you decided to write him a letter, which I love because you fully expected him to read it and do something about it. Which is why you've been my hero for 30 years.
But you have to articulate it and believe it, or nobody's, I don't know why we ask for so little when we need so much. And so I just thought somebody who had $13.7 billion to buy Whole Foods would be he has the power to change the food system. And he could do anything with that. I mean, he could really support all the people that are taking care of the land. So I had the idea of why not gut all the Whole Foods grocery stores and turn them into indoor farmers markets. And then we could buy food like they did in Europe. I was in Spain this summer in Barcelona, and it's just so amazing to have all these different vendors who have their place that they go every day, and maybe there are 10 people who have prosciutto and all of the jamon, and fish vendors, but people find the person that they connect with. And it's a nice kind of healthy competition that happens within the marketplace. And I just think we need to really give the money directly to those people who are doing that incredibly hard work.
Has he replied to you?
Pardon me?
Has he replied? Has he said, yes, Alice, this is a great idea?
Well, unfortunately, he hasn't written his letter. Maybe he's working on it.
I think, unfortunately, he doesn't know how persuasive
me?
I don't think he knows how persistent you can be, is the problem.
Well, he did write a second. I mean, he said that he was going to lower the prices of the Whole Foods, and I just wrote a letter again saying, when food can be affordable, but it can never be cheap. When it's cheap, it means that somebody's missing out, and that somebody, most of the time, is the farmer. So we have to think about food as being affordable. And I for him to slash the prices and make it cheap seemed to me absolutely the wrong way to address the enormous issue
Couldn't agree more.
of food distribution.
So after 46 years, Chef Bernice has taken on a near mythical quality to it. How do you handle expectations when people walk in? Do you let them? I'm sure you don't do anything different, but do you?
I think that the informality of the restaurant is disarming to a lot of people. That they're, expecting something else, but they're sort of pleasantly surprised that that we're not all wearing tuxedos, and that the doors of the kitchen are open, and they're invited to come in and take a look, even while they're waiting for a table. They can go into the kitchen. So they are seeing already what the food might be like. And we have a fireplace. And I love the fire in the room and the aromas in the room. And I always say I burn rosemary just to make it more aromatic. I'm just trying to reach people in a subliminal way.
I read that years ago that you would put rosemary and olive oil and garlic and walk it around the restaurant. And to be more like Alice, I've done that more than one time.
Don't burn down the restaurant.
I have not burned down the restaurant
like
yet.
I did.
You said 2 times, right? You burned down the
2
restaurant.
times.
So we're kind of coming towards the end here. You had one more passage I think you wanted to read out of your book. If you wanted to go ahead and read that.
Yeah, I will. This is the very last chapter. It's the afterword. I always joked with the journalist Bob Scheer that when he lost his bid for Congress, I was so disappointed that I opened Chez Panisse. I was deeply disillusioned about politics, and by opening the restaurant, I really thought I was dropping out. I was going to do my own thing. No politics, just a little place. But it became political because, as it turned out, food is the most political thing in all of our lives. Eating is an everyday experience, and the decisions we make about what we eat have daily consequences. And those daily consequences can change the world.
Beautiful. So we're going to open up for questions. There apparently are microphones around. So if you have a question, I think raise your hand. The person with the microphone will come over to you. Wait till you have the microphone. It's being recorded, so if you speak without it, nobody knows you exist. So anybody? No? Alice Waters? Nobody does a... Oh, there they are. Do we have microphones somewhere? Working on it. No pressure. I've never been known for my patience.
I have
There
a
we
question for you guys.
Yes.
How did you like working in Las Vegas?
It was Las Vegas. Yeah, I actually prefer here, to be honest with you.
Good answer.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Here is great because the restaurant's so small and we have control over everything. When we were in Vegas, we had absolutely every pot, pan, cooking utensil, 28 people in the kitchen, like everything you could possibly need.
Food from around the world.
Yeah, food, the best of the best. So that was kind of that's kind of a nice treat. And now we're here, and we have some of the best, freshest. But I think being here and cooking seasonally has changed both of our cooking styles completely.
We used to think that we cooked simply, already when we were in Vegas, but when we moved here and we were confronted with true world-class produce and other products that were picked the day before, or the eggs that came out of the chickens 20 minutes ago. What we thought was simple was not way too complicated. We actually had to pare down and even more simplify with it. So go ahead.
Just curious, when you were starting out as a young child, probably doing your cooking, was there ever a go-to meal that you said, this is the one I make for that first date or to impress people? Was there anything like that?
Well, I quickly learned how to make creme caramel and chocolate mousse. So it didn't matter what you were cooking before then. It's the truth, but I was very much in that French menu place. So I always thought about an hors d'oeuvre, the main dish, a salad, and a sweet. And not too sweet. Not too sweet. It was always on that edge. I thought I was very inventive by putting Cointreau in my chocolate mousse, a little, grated orange rind, and my creme caramel. But it was really a slow process because I was looking for those ingredients that tasted like they did in France. I was always looking for that taste, and I couldn't find it. And it wasn't until about 5 years into Chez Panisse that I ended up at the doorsteps of the local organic farmers. And then I found it. First came with a rancher who was grazing a lamb, sheep, out in Amador County. And I told him that I wanted really young ones. And he said, no, they cost the same price as the big ones. And I said, but I want a young lamb in the springtime. And we started getting those lambs and cooking them. And everybody who came to the restaurant responded. And they started to say, when are Dalporto's lambs coming this spring? And we just had them for about 6 weeks in the spring. But that's how we started to write up the farmers on the menu, the ranches and the farms.
Up top there?
Oh, up here.
Oh, nobody? Okay, yeah, there we are.
Welcome, Alice. My question has to do with how you came to name your restaurant. I know France was influential. It's where I first understood how to enjoy food slowly. But why not name it something simple like Alice's Restaurant?
Somebody already had that name. Because I went to see the films of Marcel Pagnol. You probably do know a little bit about this. And I was particularly fascinated by the trilogy, Marius, Fanny, and César. And Panisse was the character in those films. He was the old sailmaker who married Fanny when she was pregnant and her love had gone out to sea. And so he was an honorable sail-making person, beautiful person in the film. And as my friend Tom Luddy said, he's the only one who made any money. So maybe you should call it Chez Panisse. And I learned also that a panisse is a little chickpea pancake that they serve in Nice. It's called a panisse. And so it just rolled off one's tongue. And then I named my daughter Fanny. So those films have been very important to me, but Pagnol is. And I have to say that every French school kid reads the books of his Pagnol's life, his memoirs, The Chateau of My Father and the Glory of My Mother. The Glory of My Father and the Chateau of My Mother. Mixed up.
Go ahead.
Hi, so I am a waitress and a farmer at a farm-to-table restaurant, and I've also done a lot of youth work around farming, and something that I've noticed and that has been talked about and criticized in the movement is how the leadership is predominantly white and upper middle class, and that makes the food and the spaces really inaccessible oftentimes, especially to like communities of color and young people of color. And like there isn't always the time to make food, you know, so like all of those things in it. So my question is, how in this movement can we challenge like the systemic racism and classism that makes this space less inclusive? And like, how do you see that happening in farm-to-table restaurants or just in the school gardening in general?
I think the school is our place of equality, or can be our place of equality. If we feed every child at school, they come, they sit, they eat at the table together. And that's where it begins. It begins in that kind of communication where everybody eats together and they eat the same food. And I really, really believe that. I don't know if we don't begin when children are little. It just doesn't happen. We have to be deliberate about bringing them together. I mean, Berkeley integrated schools back in 1968, and I think it's the greatest thing that happened in that period of time. I mean, in any time, because they need to be just all kinds of kids together. And what can I say? We're trying to connect. Maybe I should show you this. We're trying to teach school lunch as I said, as an academic subject. So let's say that you are learning about the Silk Road in India, and your placemat. Good, thank you. Can't do all of this at the same time. Let's say your placemat is showing you where the Silk Road goes and what the various food products that came along the Silk Road, and you're taking academic minutes to extend the lunch hour in this particular way. And maybe you're studying, you know, the civilizations of the Americas, and you're learning about the transportation of food. Maybe it's a language class that you're using the academic minutes for, and you're learning all the words of all those foods in Spanish. This could be anything. This happens to be what, you know, we're teaching to the 6th and 7th graders. But we're eating the food of that place, okay? So maybe you're in China, and you're eating, what are you eating in China? What do we have on the back of this? A vegetable fried rice. And you're having a salad always with it. Or maybe in the Silk Road, you're having a lentil soup, and a carrot and cumin salad, and a whole grain chapati. And maybe in the Americas, maybe you're having a tamale and different colored beans and a jicama salad. So you're really digesting the lesson through all of your senses, and you're having a civilized conversation at the table. So that's my big dream of edible education, is not only to have that garden place for learning and a kitchen for learning, but to have a school lunch program that really is giving every child a wholesome and delicious meal.
Over in the corner.
Hello, Alice.
Hello.
I have not had the personal honor of dining at your restaurant, though I would have loved to. let me share
There's
with
still
you.
time.
I know. I hope so. I'm going to give testament, though, to your popularity from a slightly different perspective. A group of us went about 7 years out to San Francisco for a celebration. And I came up with this idea. I thought, oh, what a great thing. Let's all go to Chez Panisse. And none of us had been, to add this to our celebration. So I called about 2 weeks ahead of time to get a reservation. And your staff told me, oh my, it's a 30-day wait for dining. And it was, and they said, but you do have a choice. So I'm letting everyone know, I don't know what it's like today, to have a sit-down dining experience. I don't know if you still have that. Or you had a second option for more of quick serve
No,
experience. You don't have that anymore?
we have a cafe upstairs that has an a la carte menu, and we have one menu that we serve every night downstairs, every night but Sunday. Just a complete menu. So that's the downstairs restaurant, and the others have. But if you ever need a reservation, just call my office. And say you met me in Traverse City.
I'm going to take you up on that.
Question up here.
Up there?
Question up here.
I'd just like to share that over the last couple days, I was just flipping through Time magazine, the one with Ellen DeGeneres on the cover, and it's Women's First in America, and there was your picture, full-page picture, in Time magazine.
Is there
I was
anybody-
holding a chicken, and it was the first time I've ever held a chicken. It's true.
Hi, go ahead.
As my brother intimated in the introduction, my mother's cooking anything anybody didn't like, she stopped adding. And so kind of wound up with 6 kids using salt, pepper, and ketchup as the condiments. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between exquisitely simple and bland?
You asked really the right question. And you'd be surprised when you're eating second-rate, out-of-season vegetables all year round. You know, when the real thing comes, you're almost too bored to have it. You know, and what we're trying to do is really find the moment of ripeness, but it's also about spicing it. And these kids, we do an Iron Chef with the kids at the Edible Schoolyard, and it's not a regular Iron Chef kind of competition because we judge them on how well they clean up, how well they work together, yes, on presentation and on taste, but they really get into making it their own. You know, using the spices. They can use any spices they want, and then they have a very limited group of things that they're choosing to make a menu from, and it's so interesting. It's almost as if they've been starved for taste. And I think that's what's happened. We've made food so uniform and bland, and now we're finding garlic, and finding out that garlic is as good as 10 mothers, as that old Chinese proverb says, I believe.
Over here.
Hi, Alice. It's Martha Ryan. I would like to ask you if you have ever met our local guy, Michael Moore.
I
And
have.
if you have any ideas about doing anything with Michael. He had some great movies. I loved the movie where he went to France and he went to the school.
I loved that
And
section.
That is where we should be in our schools here in Michigan.
Well, absolutely. I love the little segment about the French kids eating the cheeses, being offered that. That's what we're doing, really, in the edible education classes. Empowering them to make a decision about food. We're not telling them what to eat. We're presenting that in a very Montessori way so that they fall in love with it and get connected. But I also liked that school in Finland that has such academic excellence without any testing, without any kind of intimidating testing.
We have a
Yes.
question up here.
So up top.
So you talked about the affordability of food, and I wondered if you have any radical ideas about, within the economics of the food system, how to support organic growers while making nutritionally dense food affordable to the people who need it the most, which are often the people who are experiencing food insecurity.
Well, I think there's two things that are terribly important. One is buying food directly from the farmer is very, very important. But learning how to cook simply. I mean, I've said this before, but you know, I can buy an expensive organic chicken and make 3 meals out of it. As I say, Jose Andres could make 6. But this is something really we've lost. We don't know how to use those beautiful stems of the rainbow chard. We don't know how to use the carrot tops. We don't know really how to make stock, how to make things last from one day to another, how to primarily use greens and wholesome grains, whole grains. You know, it's something that we all are going to need to learn together, and maybe if our children begin in school, they'll bring it home to their families. But this is something that's so sad, is the everybody in the family eating in another room and eating at a different time. And the great pleasure of my life is cooking with my friends and sitting down and eating with them. And we always do that once a week when I'm home, at least, when I'm not eating at the restaurant.
We have time for 2 more, right over here.
Well, Alice, I would first just like to say thank you for the work that you've done for the organic food movement. I've been a chef, a plant-based chef, since the 70s, and I deeply appreciate your voice in the world. And through my life of really dedicating my life as an educator and trying to figure out ways to further inspire people to understand the power and the politics of food. Most recently, we started working on a documentary on farm animal sanctuaries and trying to figure out how to inspire people to understand animal agriculture a little bit more. And I wonder if you have any ideas or you plan to use your voice in any way going forward to help people understand the impact on the rainforest and on climate change that animal agriculture has.
That's so important, and I know many, many people are working on this. Slow Food International, it's the goal to make the real connection between food and global warming. I really personally find films very important, and one is coming out right now that I think we should all see. It's called Eating Animals, and Natalie Portman is the producer and voice over in the film, And Jonathan Safran Foer's book is the sort of the loose screenplay for it. But it's the first film that I've seen that connects all the dots, that connects the big companies who are in collusion with the government and the changing of rules. And it will be an eye-opener. It also has the good news in it. It's got some of the greatest farmers in Iowa and Kansas raising turkeys in the real way. And you're very engaged with the stories of it. But it's an amazing, powerful film. And I can't recommend it enough. I'm sure it will have wide distribution this fall. But there are many, many, many films, and I hope that Slow Food can help to write a list down so that we can be informed and spread the word. But there's nothing better than going out and meeting the farmer or the rancher, just going out there and talking to him. And once you see that, you can't stop talking about it. You know, that's the good news.
Okay, last one.
So this might not actually be the best question to end on, but I'm so curious, if you could be totally transparent with us, what's your guilty junk food? Like when you walk, like when you walk through the supermarket, like do you grab that box of Kraft mac and cheese, or what is it? What is it that you're afraid to admit that you?
I never go to the supermarket. But I do go to the airports. But I have to say, I have a little rule. It's got to be organic. But I do eat potato chips.
Oh, I knew there was a crack there somewhere. So, Alice, thank you so much for this evening. This has been